CountryWide CONNECT with Andy Thompson and Sarah Perriam-Lampp.
Chief Executive of Dairy NZ. Campbell, g'day mate, welcome to the show. Appreciate your time, thank you.
How are you, Andy? You well?
Very good, mate. You in the Waikato today?
Yeah, I am actually.
Is it better than 9 degrees in the Waikato? What's the temperature up there?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's probably early to mid-teens. I was just talking to Chris Lewis, who was out on farm, and
Chris Lewis was out on farm. Really?
Yeah, back from Europe yesterday. He's been away on holiday with his good wife, and he's back out on the farm. Spent 3 hours on the digger this morning.
I'm just stunned that Chris Lewis was actually out on farm. Okay, all right. Who knew? Yeah. Yes, I'd seen him swanning around Europe for the past 3 months while you and I were both working. Good on him.
Yeah, no, I think he had about a month away.
Yeah, no, good on him. Good luck to him too. I'm only joking. I love you, Chris. Hey, Campbell, I'd love to not be talking to you about this next topic, but I'm very pleased I am talking to you about it. Foot and mouth is obviously one of the doomsday scenarios for New Zealand agriculture. I don't think we can overstate the seriousness of foot and mouth that if it ever got here into New Zealand. We talked to the Minister, Andrew Hoggart, about it briefly last week, and the exercise that you guys have got coming up. You're the chair of the Government Industry Agreement, and with the Minister of Primary, or the Deed of Governance Group. Talk to me a little bit about this exercise. Give me some nuts and bolts on how it's happening. What are you actually doing?
Yeah, so Andy, let me just take a slight step back. So chair of the FMD Council, so that's the 6 industry livestock bodies and the government MPI. So that's a partnership. Last year we agreed the FMD operational agreement, which is really important because, like you say, should it ever come to these shores, we've got to make sure we get a really clear plan. And then, yes, there's the Taranaki exercise coming up, but actually there's a couple of other pieces. So it's just probably worth for listeners understanding what we're doing around that, because having a clear plan is really important. Yep. So the first thing was that there was some regional workshops last year around raising awareness and the fact that we have got a council set up and a clear plan along with government. The exercise that's coming up that was announced by Minister Hoggart last week is the exercise in Taranaki, which is taking a simulation of what do we need to do should it turn up and what's the plan, and testing some of that. So that's what's happening in terms of nuts and bolts on the ground in Taranaki. And then there's a series of exercises through from, and I'm just looking at my notes here, but from July through May to July with government, because there's also a need for an all-industry response and government. And what those processes are set to do is to test our level of readiness today. Are there any gaps, and what do we need to do to fill those? So that's the exercise. I think it's really good we're doing it. And the other point I'd make is not one agency can do this alone. So testing it with the various agencies, making sure we've got clarity around what the kind of playbook is, should it ever turn up, and how you have a full government response and industry is really important.
How much of what you've just outlined is a result of our learnings, and I hate using that corporate speak, from the M. bovis outbreak?
Yeah, look, there are some learnings. Let's just label it for what it is. Yep. There are some learnings, particularly around animal movements, traceability, and how quickly you can understand and wrap around this. So in the FMD operational agreement, we've worked with government on what is called a medium-scale response, but there is an absolute direction from government wired in, and this is, needs to be enduring for our country, that it is a stamp it out. Should it ever come here, we quickly stamp it out and ring fence it and then get on and do what we need to. So the biggest learning about that is the importance of traceability of animals and knowing where stock movements are.
Yeah, one thing that Andrew Hoggart said last week was the ability, and using Germany as an example, to regionalise an outbreak quickly. And is that part of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, and then, we've got some natural isolation, North and South Island, obviously. But yes, if you look at the German example, they were able to isolate that really quickly and then trace back to where it came, and it didn't spread. And therefore, they're able to open up access to markets and all those things, which for us is critical because we're an exporter. So how we do that, how you ring fence it, how you get an all of industry response and government is critical should it ever come to these shores. And, from my perspective, it's probably one of our biggest sovereign risks, and we've got to have a clear plan.
It is. It's our biggest biological risk, I would have thought, biosecurity risk. Just on that then, bringing this right down to a farmer or to a farm gate level, how much knowledge does your average New Zealand farmer have about foot and mouth? I mean, I actually old enough to remember the last time we actually had a scare in New Zealand, back in, I think it was probably back into the 70s or the early 80s, when there was a potential outbreak, and it ended up it wasn't. But I can still remember quite a bit of information about what it looked like, what you're actually looking for. How do you recognise it on your own farm? Is there, I'm just wondering, is there a bit of a gap there to what your average farmer actually knows what to look for? How would you identify it?
Yeah, look, I think it'd be fair to say, Andy, it'll be mixed. There'll be some that are well researched and have a clear biosecurity plan. I think when you take back to the practical things, what can you do on farm? Have a very clear biosecurity plan, good processes, people on and off farm. We had 100 farmers around at Live Farm last week. They all stepped through a bath there. We got good at those practices through Bovis. Sometimes we get a bit relaxed. So I think about understanding, and then I think there's a need on us as industry to continue to educate farmers around not only what the risks are, but what the signs are, and what they can practically do on farm.
Yeah, I just wondered whether, as a sector, we're kind of a little bit relying on the authorities and the leaders and potentially the veterinary organisations, whereas the first time it gets spotted, it would have to be by an individual farmer, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think the good thing about the work we've been doing since the formation, in the negotiations with government through, you mentioned the GIA, which is the livestock industries, through the deed agreement and negotiations with government, was about that collaboration, working together. So you've also got the meat industry in there, you've got the processors in there. We've all got a role to play. So I think that's really important around how do we continue to make sure that farmers are aware, got good practices. And then at the other end, should it ever turn up, because we can't just rely on the borders being, controlled. Should it ever turn up here, and it has been in Indonesia, it's been in Europe, then we have a clear plan around how we will act.
Yeah. Worst case scenario is it get into Australia first and foremost, and then, I imagine as part of your planning, that would be, we would have to ramp up a huge amount of preparedness if it did get into Australia, and their proximity to Indonesia means that there is a risk, a vector there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think we've got a call this afternoon actually around vaccine banks. So it's one of the streams of work. So, there's some really active pieces that are quite tangible that the likes of the council now has been formed and are working through with government. And we've got a call this afternoon for an hour and a half on that. Just around, so that's another example, and there's operational plans that we're digging into as what we call part of our readiness activities, because we need to be planned.
Well, I do. That reassures me quite a lot, Campbell, because my perception of coming back to M. bovis was that we were woefully unprepared for M. bovis. And as a farmer at the time, I'd never heard of it. And then all of a sudden, this is a second biggest risk to biosecurity, in New Zealand agriculture. And going, what? And then when it did break out, when we did get it, it seemed like we were scrambling for months, building up policies, procedures, funding mechanisms, way to compensation. It was a complete shambles for several months.
Yeah, look, and I think that the one thing I would say on that, Andy, and I joined the M. bovis Council when I joined Dairy NZ back in 2023. By then, the process had matured, but I think it's really important you don't lose those things. So even the compensation pieces out of what was called DB-CAT that was set up, we've got those, captured. We know how to deal with those. Compensation in these things is always a really kind of difficult area. But having clarity, and then we've got a fiscal cap with government, which is really important, so we know what industry will be up for, what government's up for. Those things were only enabled because of some of that work out of Bovis as well. And then I think the other one around that is, how do you have to collaborate on this stuff. Not the industry bodies can do it alone, not the processors can do it alone, not government can do it alone. So that cross-sector, and that's probably one of the things we learned out of that that Bovis experience as well. How do you really genuinely work across the various parties to have a clear plan?
Absolutely. Right. I just want to pivot to some good news. Press release from you guys yesterday. Positive freshwater results delivered by good farming practices analysis confirms. That's a nice headline. What's going on?
Yeah. Look, and I think it shows and highlights the good work from farmers over a long period of time. You know, we've still got to balance up environmental expectations, social license, all those things, but highlight the good work that farmers are doing. You know, and that's a really nice, it's a really nice piece. I think it's been picked up by Farmers Weekly as well, so it'll be on the media. And a lot of farmers are doing incredibly good stuff out there, and we should tell that story more.
Yeah, it's actual science, which I really like.
Yep.
Other than just sort of anecdotal, evidence.
Yeah, and it's actual science, and it's also monitoring what's actually happening in the ecosystem. So we've been, and we'll call for this again in terms of some of our work around what we call our policy manifesto going into the election this year. We've got to, as a country, start thinking about data and measuring the outcomes we want in water as an infrastructure asset, not just doing it disparately, because we export 95% of what we produce. We've got to balance the environmental outcomes, but we need evidence to show the good work that is being done.
Yeah, what it does say, the results show a clear link between widespread implementation of good farming practices and lower contaminant losses from land to water in New Zealand dairy farms. So it's lower usage, but also obviously all the riparian plantings and good practice, which is leading to higher water quality. Still not where we want it, right? And the opponents of farming will still point out that, this river's not swimmable. In fact, I asked someone about it the other day, what does it actually mean? And they said, there's a 2% chance that someone will get sick if they're in the water, These levels are quite low, which they consider to be serious. But it's good to see it's improving.
Yeah, look, and I mean, if you look at wintering practices, for example, I remember when the work was down in Southland, you look at the number of farmers that have a clear wintering plan now. All of those things help. So, big accolade and call out to all the farmers that are doing the good mahi that they are across the country.
Yeah, certainly very good to see that. And I suppose farmers also are fortunate that good payouts, good money coming in, which means it does actually make some of these environmental practices easier to implement on farm. It's a good time to do it.
Yeah, it is, but I would also just not caution, Andy, but just reflect that, I was talking to someone earlier today who's saying at least 50 cents to probably $1 per kilo milk solids on farm cost pressure going into this next season. Fertiliser, fert, finance, palm kernel, all those inputs are certainly, so keeping an eye on the bottom line and making sure you're doing it profitably is really important as well.
Yeah, well, that's where your dairy base comes in. You guys, so are you doing some work on that, Dairy NZ, actually looking at, potentially what these costs will look like? We heard yesterday that I think it was Maersk or the shipping putting, 20% surcharge on everything that comes into New Zealand. That's going to flow through real quick.
Yeah, definitely the economics team. We have a good economics team. They actually provided quite a lot of modelling in around the fuel example, around where the cost pressures would come, as well as fertiliser. But yeah, doing work around that, and then you're right, dairy base is a really good tool around measuring and benchmarking performance as well. But yes, definitely doing work. We've called for the 5 Fs, and for farmers to be really aware of those in terms of their planning as well.
Yeah, all right. Campbell, great to have you on the show, mate. Really appreciate it. I know you've got a very busy day, and good luck. So when is when is that exercise, that foot and mouth one?
The farm gate exercise is on the 13th of May, so next week.
Yep.
I'll actually be down. We've got a board meeting in Christchurch next week. And then the other what's known as the Cloven Shield pieces that was referenced in Minister Hoggard's release is also happening through mid-July as well.
Yeah, actually, I heard you coming down this way, but strangely enough, I'm going home for a few days. That'll be nice. Anyway, hey, mate, look, appreciate your time. Thank you. I remember a few years ago, we actually, when I was farming in Nelson, so quite a few years ago, we actually came in and foot and mouth. They did an exercise on farm. They actually cleaned the cow shed, it got sparkly clean. It was brilliant. cleanest it ever was. It was amazing. But so good to see.
Look, Andy, happy to join the show. Good topic, really important topic.
CountryWide Connect with Andy Thompson and Sarah Perriam-Lampp.